Imagine you are walking down a snowy city street.
Okay.
It is 3 a.m. The temperature has just completely plummeted, well below freezing, and the city it's totally silent.
Right. Nobody's out.
Exactly. The only sound is your own footsteps. And then you see headlights approaching in the distance.
Which is, I mean, totally normal.
It's an entirely ordinary occurrence. We all see cars driving at night. We don't really think twice about it. But in the case we're exploring today, that totally ordinary occurrence turns into an absolute nightmare. Welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission today is to understand a really highly unusual criminal profile based on the Wikipedia article of Lawrence Paul Mills.
Yeah, this is a tough one.
It is. We are looking into a predator who took everyday environments and his own specific mechanical skills to camouflage horrific, intentional acts of violence as just tragic traffic accidents.
And it really forces us to completely reevaluate our ingrained assumptions about crime. I mean, when we look at criminal history, we're conditioned to look for certain patterns, right?
Right, like guns, knives, dark alleys.
Exactly. Certain weapons, certain types of crime scenes. But in a world where we just hear about crime constantly, this specific story stands out because it challenges the very definition of what a murder weapon actually is. We're looking at how something as ubiquitous as a commuter SUV can be transformed into this highly effective, incredibly destructive tool for a serial killer.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really understand how these crimes were committed, we have to look at the man behind the wheel. The sheer duality of his life it's just staggering.
It's the classic true crime paradox.
It really is. So Lawrence Paul Mills III was born on September 3, 1987 in Garden City, Michigan. If you look at his background, his life reads like any completely standard biography you might find in the Detroit suburbs.
Just a totally average guy.
Right. He worked at a pizza place in Allen Park. He was a father to one son. He was highly active on social media. He frequently posted photos of himself and his boy on Facebook. If you only saw his digital footprint, you just see a normal working dad.
And that digital footprint, it acts as a form of active camouflage.
Yeah.
We have this deep psychological need for monsters to actually look like monsters.
Yeah, we want them to be obvious.
Exactly. We want them lurking in the shadows, entirely disconnected from society. But here we have a man folding pizza boxes in Allen Park by day, smiling for selfies with his kid, projecting this incredibly mundane protective persona.
But beneath that,
Right. Beneath that carefully constructed facade, his nighttime activities were violently predatory. And that stark contrast makes cases like this exceptionally difficult for investigators to crack early on. I mean, the community doesn't suspect the friendly guy at the pizza shop. That camouflage of normalcy provides him with an immense amount of operational freedom.
and that freedom allowed him to develop a modus operandi that is truly terrifying. When the sun went down, that ordinary dad facade just vanished. The research outlines his methods with pretty chilling clarity. Mills would solicit sex workers in the Detroit area, engage in sexual acts, and then he would demand his money back.
It's a power play.
Totally. And if the women refused or tried to flee, he would physically beat them. But his ultimate weapon of control and ultimately of murder wasn't a firearm. It wasn't a knife.
It was his vehicle.
It was his vehicle, a 2006 Golden Pan Chevy Trailblazer. He would literally use this massive SUV to run them down.
Demanding the money back and then weaponizing his vehicle when denied, that really speaks to a calculated method of dehumanization. He's reducing these human beings to simple transactions.
Yeah.
And when the transaction doesn't conclude on his terms, the rage is instantaneous. He uses a massive piece of machinery to enact that revenge. It's a profound escalation from physical assault to vehicular homicide.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Automotive culture blogs, specifically places like Jalopnik, actually picked up on this case back in 2020.
Which is wild because they usually cover like car reviews and industry news.
Exactly. But they ran a headline pointing out that Mills might be the first serial killer to essentially use a car as his primary murder weapon. We hear about getaway cars all the time, obviously, but the vehicle itself being the actual murder weapon for a serial offender is incredibly rare.
What's fascinating here is the psychology behind that specific choice of weapon. When we study serial offenses, the choice of weapon is highly analyzed because it reveals so much about the offender's internal state.
Like a knife is personal.
Right. Knives imply a desire for intimate, close quarters control. Firearms imply a desire for lethal efficiency and physical distance. But a car is a totally different psychological tool.
How so?
Well, first, it offers distance and a physical barrier. The killer is literally encased in steel and glass, physically protected from their victim, and psychologically insulated from the immediate tactile reality of the murder.
You don't have to look them in the eye.
Exactly. Second, it provides overwhelming brute force. A 2006 Chevy Trailblazer weighs well over 4,000 pounds. When accelerating, the kinetic energy is just devastating, but the absolute most crucial element here is the plausible deniability.
Oh man, that plausible deniability is terrifying, because if someone finds a body on the side of the road that has clearly been struck by a vehicle, the immediate assumption from first responders isn't, premeditated murder.
Precisely. The immediate assumption is a hit-and-run accident.
Right.
A tragic, reckless, maybe drunk driving incident, but an accident nonetheless. It essentially gives the killer an automatic alibi built into the very nature of the crime scene. The authorities are initially looking for a panicked driver who made a terrible mistake and fled.
Not a serial killer.
No, they are not looking for a calculating predator who's hunting for sport. That fundamentally changes the trajectory of the investigation from day one. I mean, homicide detectives aren't necessarily the ones getting the first call. It goes to the traffic division. He exploited a massive bureaucratic and investigative blind spot.
And exploiting that blind spot allowed him to go on just a horrifying spree. Let's look at the timeline of terror that gripped Southwest Detroit in 2017. Seeing it chronologically really highlights how his brazenness escalated. The earliest incident noted in these records happened on March 17, 2017.
Okay.
It's around 4 a.m. near the intersection of Michigan and St. James. There is a hit-and-run incident fitting this exact MO, but in this initial case, the victim actually survived.
The timing there is highly significant. 4 a.m. This is an individual who deeply understands the cover of night and the rhythm of the city. He knows exactly when the streets are empty, when the likelihood of witnesses is practically zero.
Especially in Michigan.
Exactly. In a Detroit winter at 4 a.m., the environment itself is hostile. That means there are very few people even looking out their windows. His victims are at their most isolated.
He certainly used that isolation to his advantage, because after that March incident, things escalate drastically. 7 months later, on October 16, 2017, at 3 a.m., the violence turns fatal. The body of 34-year-old Melinda Salazar is discovered on a sidewalk in southwest Detroit. And the details surrounding her death are truly heartbreaking, particularly because Melinda Salazar was pregnant at the time.
It is entirely devastating, and it underscores the extreme vulnerability of the specific demographic he was targeting. He wasn't just using a physically overpowering weapon. He was selecting victims who were already operating at a severe disadvantage.
The violence didn't stop there. Less than 2 months later, on December 13, 2017, at 3:45 a.m., another devastating discovery is made. 59-year-old Carol Ann White is found face down in the snow, lying between the sidewalk and the street on Campbell in southwest Detroit. And it's also noted that Mills is strongly suspected in the death of a 32-year-old woman named Mary Penegor, whose body was found on that exact same street.
When we look at this cluster of attacks, March, October, December, and we look at the locations, primarily in southwest Detroit, specifically around Campbell Street, a very clear geographic hunting ground emerges.
Yeah, he had a territory.
He did. And we have to analyze the victims themselves in the context of the environment. Serial killers historically prey on marginalized groups. Sex workers, people out on the streets at 3 or 4 in the morning in the freezing snow. These are individuals who are already operating on the fringes of societal protection.
It's so sad.
It is. Predators rely on systemic blind spots. They bank on the grim reality that these victims might not be reported missing immediately by family members, or that law enforcement might not prioritize a pedestrian hit and run involving a sex worker the way they would, say, a high-profile home invasion in the suburbs.
That systemic blind spot is what allowed him to keep operating. But a predator's luck eventually runs out. And the turning point in this case is an incredible testament to human survival.
It really is.
Just days after Carol Ann White was found in the snow in December 2017, Mills attacked again.
Yeah.
He targeted a 29-year-old pregnant woman. He beat her, and then he struck her several times with that golden tan Trailblazer. But despite being beaten and despite being hit by a 2-ton SUV multiple times, she managed to get away.
Wow.
Yeah, she escaped, and she immediately called the police.
Her survival is nothing short of miraculous given the sheer kinetic force of a vehicle strike. But it's her courage to immediately contact the police that ultimately breaks this case wide open. She provided the crucial eyewitness testimony that linked the vehicle to a deliberate physical assault.
It wasn't just an accident anymore.
Exactly. She transformed a string of isolated accidents into a clear, undeniable pattern of attempted murder. Without her explicitly stating that the driver intentionally used the vehicle as a weapon after an assault, who knows how long he would have continued to hide behind the guise of traffic fatalities.
So what does this all mean? We have a timeline of attacks concentrated heavily throughout 2017. We have a survivor who escapes and calls the police in December of 2017, providing a description of the method and the vehicle. Yet Lawrence Paul Mills wasn't arrested until April 24, 2020.
That's a huge gap.
I keep getting stuck on that gap. That is an investigation spanning nearly 3 years after a survivor literally goes to the police. How does a man committing these massive, brutal, incredibly messy vehicular attacks evade capture for that long? Hitting a human body with a car isn't a clean process.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, hitting a human body with a vehicle at speed causes immense, highly specific damage to the car. In forensic terms, a hit-and-run vehicle is a massive driving piece of evidence.
Like there has to be damage.
We're talking about the kinematics of pedestrian impacts. You get severe dents to the hood, shattered plastic from the headlights, cracked windshields, and significant undercarriage damage. Furthermore, the low-card exchange principle dictates that every contact leaves a trace.
Heat transfer, right?
Yes, a vehicle strike leaves fabric impressions on the clear coat of the paint. It leaves biological evidence, blood, hair, tissue, deeply embedded in the grille and the undercarriage. It also leaves paint transfer from the car onto the victim's clothing. Normally, finding the car means finding the killer because the car is a billboard of guilt.
But Mills wasn't just an ordinary driver who panicked. He had a very specific skill set that changed the forensic equation entirely. Investigators noted that he had the mechanical ability to frequently change vehicles and repair cars.
And that is the terrifying differentiator in this case. His mechanical skills essentially acted as a highly effective forensic shield. He wasn't just taking his car to a local body shop where a mechanic might get suspicious about a blood-stained, shattered bumper.
He did it himself.
He had the knowledge to pull that golden tan Trailblazer into his own garage and systematically dismantle the crime scene. He could hammer out the dents, source and replace the shattered headlights, and aggressively scrub the biological matter from the undercarriage, effectively erasing the physical footprint of his crimes.
Or just get a new car entirely.
Exactly. Alternatively, he had the know-how to just swap vehicles entirely, acquiring a different car and blending back into traffic. He was quite literally destroying the murder weapon after the kills and then rebuilding it to use again.
It is deeply unsettling to think about the level of cold, methodical calculation that requires. You commit a brutal murder at 3:45 a.m., crushing a person with a 4,000-pound machine. And by breakfast, you are standing in a freezing garage, methodically replacing a shattered bumper and scrubbing away biological evidence, all so you can go clock in at your job at the pizza place in Allen Park like nothing happened.
It demonstrates a chilling level of compartmentalization, the psychological disconnect required to transition from a violent predator in the dead of night to a meticulous mechanic at dawn and then to a smiling father in the afternoon is profound.
It's sociopathic.
Completely. That ability to scrub the evidence is exactly why he could evade capture from 2017 to 2020. He was covering his tracks with a wrench and a fresh coat of paint, effectively neutralizing the primary physical evidence the police needed to make an arrest.
But eventually, the net did close. The investigation, spanning those several years, finally gathered enough circumstantial and direct evidence to move forward. On April 24, 2020, Lawrence Paul Mills was arrested. And the legal proceedings that followed were incredibly intense. Mills actually confessed to 2 of the murders during the process.
But then he pled not guilty.
Yes. Despite that confession, when it came time for court, he still pleaded not guilty to the charges.
Which is a complex legal strategy, but not entirely unheard of, especially given the unique nature of the weapon. By pleading not guilty, the defense forces the state to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt in a trial setting.
They were playing on the hit-and-run angle.
Exactly. They may have been hoping that the unusual nature of the weapon in the car might create a sliver of reasonable doubt in the minds of a jury. The defense might attempt to argue a lack of premeditated intent, suggesting that perhaps these were tragic accidents that occurred during an argument rather than calculated vehicular homicide. When the weapon is a car, the line between vehicular manslaughter and second-degree murder hinges entirely on proving the driver's state of mind at the exact moment of acceleration.
But the jury saw right through any attempts to minimize the intent behind his actions. On November 17, 2021, the verdict came down. Lawrence Paul Mills was found guilty of 2 counts of second-degree murder, as well as assault causing a miscarriage, stillbirth, or death. For transforming a Chevy Trailblazer into a weapon of terror and stalking the streets of Detroit, he was sentenced to 28 to 48 years in prison. He is currently serving that sentence, imprisoned at the Macomb Correctional Facility in Michigan.
It's a heavy, dark conclusion to a deeply unsettling chapter in Detroit's history. While those convictions bring some measure of justice for Melinda Salazar, Carol Ann White, the surviving victims, and their families, the sheer span of his activities and his ability to hide in plain sight leaves a very lingering footprint. It forces us to acknowledge how easily the mundane can be weaponized.
It really does. And to you, our listener, I want you to think about how this deep dive changes your perspective tomorrow morning. When you walk out of your house, when you stand at a crosswalk and wait for the light to change, you are going to see heavy machinery passing by you constantly.
All day long.
We take the safety of our physical environment entirely for granted. This case is a stark reminder that our ingrained assumptions about crime, the idea that a murderer requires a gun or a knife or stealthy tactics in the shadows, can completely blind us to the dangers hiding in plain sight. Danger hides in the form of a smiling dad on Facebook. It hides in the guise of a pizza shop employee. And it hides in everyday objects, like a passing 2006 Chevy Trailblazer. We assume a car is just a car, a tool for commuting, until someone decides to turn it into something lethal.
This raises an important question, and it's a thought I want to leave everyone with today. It's the kind of realization that lingers long after you finish researching a case like this. We know for a fact that Mills had the mechanical ability to repair and swap cars seamlessly. We know that a car provides the ultimate mobile camouflage, making a brutal murder look like a routine, albeit tragic, traffic collision.
Right.
Given those facts and knowing how he operated, we have to wonder how many other tragic hit-and-run accidents sitting right now in the cold case archives of Detroit's traffic division were actually undetected serial murders. How many other victims were chalked up to reckless driving or a terrible mistake in the snow, when in reality, they were the calculated kills of a man who simply drove home, pulled into his garage, and scrubbed the evidence away before the sun came up. It makes you wonder what else is hiding in those accident files, just waiting for someone to look closer.